And I'm very honored to chair the session which is entitled Mosaic of Cultures, and with accordingly the topics on lectures go to very different subjects, and if I may start with explaining that Dirk Sadowski, who is the first speaker, is not here. His lecture is recorded, and we will hear it via various technical devices. So I will start with introducing him. Dr. Dirk Sadowski is research fellow and coordinator of the German-Israeli Textbook Commission at the Leibniz Institute for Educational Media and Georg Eckert Institute at Braunschweig. From 2001 to 2009, he was research associate at the Simon Dubnow Institute for Jewish History and Culture, and his doctoral thesis examined an area of Jewish educational history, Herz Homberg and the Habsburg school system for Jews in Galicia. This is the topic that today's lecture will be about. His research interests are in history of Haskalah and Enlightened Jewish pedagogy and Hebrew printing in 18th century, and the description of Jews, Judaism, Israel, and the Middle East conflict in educational media. And I think it's sensible to introduce all speakers just before their lectures. So now I give voice to the machine representing Dr. Dirk Sadowski.
Dear Israel, dear friends, I would have very much liked to be with you in Jerusalem in person. But due to a pandemic that we have almost forgotten, I had to cancel my flight in the last minute and to stay in isolation here in Germany. So I hope you will enjoy my presentation also in this improvised and remote way. From the very beginning, the policy that the Austrian state under Emperor Joseph II and his successors implemented towards the Jewish population of the Habsburg Empire included the regulation of the use of their languages. In order to make the Jewish nation, which is so numerous in my hereditary lands, more useful to the state, the first beneficial step can be taken by the unnoticed, that means immediate, elimination of their national language. Joseph decreed in a handwritten letter to the Viennese court chancellery on May 13, 1781, which is generally regarded as the beginning of the imperial tolerance policy. By the national language of the Jews, Joseph and his officials understood both languages written in Hebrew characters, Hebrew as well as Yiddish, since the comprehensibility of documents in official dealings was initially the focus of their interest. All legally relevant documents such as contracts, wills, invoices, and commercial books were in future to be written in the customary language of each country. In order to give the Jews the opportunity to learn the respective language, a school set up according to the normal teaching method, the Normalmethode, Normallehrart, was to be established at the main synagogues of each country. Where this was not possible, Jewish children were to attend the existing public, that means the Christian schools. Further motives for the intended change of language emerged in the process of deliberations of the imperial draft in the responsible committees and authorities. The focus here was on the moral education and enlightenment of the Jews, thus an essential subcomplex of the discourse of the civic improvement of the Jews, which Christian Wilhelm von Dohm had initiated in Prussia at almost the same time. In the opinion of the court chancellery, the German language textbooks to be written for the new Jewish schools should, I quote, present only natural and philosophical truth, deny the absurd credulity and superstition by the true light of reason, but especially the connection of people among themselves, and present to them, that means to the Jewish children, a true moral teaching. After the State Council had endorsed the establishment of Jewish normal schools, a decree was issued by the court chancellery to all state governments on 19th of October 1781, which set the parameters of the future Jewish normal school system. It regulated the questions of teacher training, supervisory structures, the textbooks to be used, and the attendance of Christian schools by Jewish children. The court decree applied to all provinces of the monarchy, so the respective provincial governments were charged with establishing Jewish schools in their area of responsibility. The school system for the Jewish population was to be modeled on the so-called normal schools, which had already been established for the Christian population in the empire since the adoption of the General School Regulation in 1774. The majority of these institutions were 1 to 3 class trivial and secondary schools in which the children of the general population, who had previously been given at most some religious instruction, learned to read, write, and do arithmetics. Instruction was based on the teaching method of the Silesian school reformer Johann Ignaz von Felbinger, which had been declared the normal teaching method or normal method in Austria, that means the didactic norm. As a rule, the authorities understood German to be the national language that Jewish children had to learn in the normal schools. This was especially true in the Kingdom of Bohemia, where the focus was also on teaching German in the Christian normal schools and later in Galicia. In Moravia, the Bohemian language, that means Czech, was allowed to be used for the production of documents in addition to German and was taught in school. In Hungary, Jewish normal school instruction could take place in Hungarian or in, as it was called, Slavonic language. After the first schools were founded in Prague and Trieste in May 1782, Jewish normal schools were established in quick succession in the countries of the monarchy. In contrast to the Haskalah schools that were established in various places in Germany, in the Habsburg Empire, with the exception of Trieste, the initiative to establish the new educational institutions did not come from enlightened and acculturated representatives of the community elites or from masculine. In the best cases, as in Prague, the conditions for the establishment of schools were negotiated between the state and the Jewish community, but in the vast majority of cases they were imposed by the authorities. As decreed, the overall supervision of school establishment and teaching lay with the Christian school directorate of the respective country. In Galicia, with its large Jewish population, a peculiarity came into play in the discussions about the Jewish school system that did not apply, or only to a limited extent, to the other countries. It resulted from the idea of a special moral deprivation of the Polish Galician Jews and the cameralistic view derived from this of their extremely negative influence on the economic well-being of the country. Thus, as a high Lemberg government official put it in 1786, it was first and foremost a matter of, I quote, transforming the Jewish nation, whose moral and religious character is extremely corrupt, into useful or at least less harmful citizens of the state, for which German education was to prepare the ground. Closely linked to this motive was a question of linguistic acculturation. The Eastern Yiddish language used by the Galician Jews was regarded as a particular obstacle to the desired moral improvement. Much more strongly than in Bohemia, Moravia, or even in Hungary, where larger parts of the Jewish population belonged to the Western Yiddish language area, the language policy adopted by Joseph II towards the Jews in Galicia was also aimed at the colloquial use of Yiddish. Not only was the teaching of literacy in the sense of being able to read and write German at the center of instruction, but the use of a pure German pronunciation and the intended displacement of Yiddish from the everyday life of Galician Jews played an at least equally important role. The great importance attached to the implementation of German education for Jewish children in Galicia becomes clear in the appointment of Herz Homberg as supervisor of the Jewish German school system in 1787. Homberg, a maskil and close confidant of Moses Mendelssohn, had previously worked for several years as a teacher in the Jewish Normal School of Trieste and repeatedly brought himself to the attention of the Habsburg authorities as the author of writings aimed at reforming the Jewish school system. From Lemberg, within a few years, he succeeded in strongly advancing the previously sluggish development of the Jewish normal school system in Galicia. While there were only 28 Jewish German schools when he took office in 1787, including the Lemberg Secondary School, founded in 1782, and the secondary school in Brody, established in 1784. 4 years later, there were already 93 schools spread throughout the country. At its peak, at the beginning of 1797, the Jewish German school system in Galicia comprised 109 schools, employing a total of 117 teachers and 4 female teachers. However, Homberg's often insensitive attitude towards parents and community elites, as well as his persistent attempts to reform even the traditional cheder teaching, limited his assertiveness by intensifying the Galician Jews' resistance to Homberg and the schools under his supervision. Thus, even in the heyday of the Jewish normal school system in Galicia, only a relatively small proportion of school-aged Jewish boys and girls may have regularly attended German schools. Under Homberg's supervision, Jewish boys in Galicia, and from 1790 on increasingly Jewish girls as well, received instruction geared essentially to learning the German language. The curriculum probably hardly differed from that of other Jewish German schools in the Habsburg Empire. In a normal school week in 1794, a first-year student in the lower section of the first grade at the Jewish secondary school in Lemberg had to complete 3.5 hours of basic exercises such as knowing the letters, spelling from the blackboard or by means of tables, 4 hours of reading exercises, and 1 hour each of elementary German grammar and writing. The timetable was completed by 2.5 hours of arithmetic. In the timetable of the so-called upper section of the first grade, the same subjects were found for the most part, only spelling was missing, but learning to write took up a little more space. In the second grade, in addition to 9 hours of reading lessons, there were 7 hours of writing lessons, that means writing, spelling, dictation, 3 hours of grammar, and 3 hours of arithmetics on the timetable. Finally, the advanced pupils in grade 3 had to take such demanding subjects like letter style, written essays, and language teaching in addition to reading, writing, and arithmetic lessons. In addition to the acquisition of reading and writing skills in German and the education of decent and industrious subjects by means of so-called moral instruction, There was another teaching objective in Galicia that is not immediately apparent from the subject titles of the general curriculum of the German schools, namely the practice of so-called pure pronunciation of German. Behind this formulation, which can be found again and again in the sources, or the propagation of so-called accent-free German speaking, was a demand not to use Yiddish in class as a language of instruction. The Austrian language policy towards Galician Jews was not only aimed at eliminating the Yiddish language in school, but also at eliminating it as an everyday means of communication among the Jews themselves. This is indicated, among other things, by the words of the Christian school supervisor for Galicia, Johann Nepomuk Franz Hoffmann, who complained in a report in 1789 that the Jewish children still did not use, as he said, the purified German dialect in their family environment, which they learned at school. Behind the importance that the Austrian authorities attached to the use of the so-called purified German dialect and the suppression of the so-called Jewish accent in Jewish schools was a rejection of the Yiddish language as a supposed haven of immorality and one of the main obstacles on the path of the moral improvement of the Jews. Here, enlightened Austrian officials met with the Jewish enlighteners. Moses Mendelssohn, as is well known, was not the only one to express his reservations about the Yiddish language, which he feared had, I quote, contributed not a little to the immorality of the common man, quote end. Analogous to the language discussion of the general Enlightenment, more radical Jewish Enlightenment thinkers, such as David Friedlander, claimed that the Yiddish language, in its mixed nature and supposed lack of rules, was unsuitable for attaining true reason, piety, and morality, since these could only be attained through clear concepts, ergo a pure language. But masculine such as Naftali Herz-Wessely, Isaac Satanov, or Yehuda Ben Zeev also expressed sharp criticism in their works of the use of the Yiddish language and its use in traditional Cheder teaching, and pleaded for the use of a pure language, be it German or Hebrew. In the Jewish normal schools in Galicia, reading and moral lessons provided the framework for practicing pure speech. But the recitation of the daily so-called school laws could also be used by the teachers as an opportunity to correct the pupils' pronunciation. Those boys who had acquired particularly good German pronunciation in the course of their lessons were allowed to recite a short speech prepared by the teachers in front of the community notables and representatives of the authorities for the public examinations at the end of each school course. This was to serve as an incentive for the pupils. Since the achievement of the teaching goal of a pure pronunciation could hardly be proven by means of the pupils' test papers, which had to be sent to Vienna every 6 months, these examination speeches in the presence of the superintendent over the schools or the respective district school director served to check the progress of the pupils in this area. From the very beginning, the Jewish normal school teachers had to ensure that their pupils made an effort to use the German language correctly orally. This was probably not always easy for them, especially since they themselves did not always master the pure pronunciation. As a high Lemberg government official noted in 1788 in a report on the state of the school system, there was hardly a Jewish trivial school in Galicia, I quote, where the teacher does not have a noticeable Jewish accent in the German pronunciation, quote end. In their visitation reports, however, the district school directors also noted when a teacher had rendered special services to the teaching of pure German pronunciation. In October 1789, for example, the district school director of the Bochnia district requested a financial reward for the teacher of the German Jewish school in Wisnich because he had made efforts with noticeable success to, quote, eradicate the Jewish accent in the German language, quote, end. At the same time, the school director of Stanislau also noted that the Jewish school in the district town deserved excellent applause and that the teacher deserved a reward because, thanks to his skill, the pupils, I quote, excelled in reading, in pure pronunciation, in moral teaching, and in the German language. It is only surprising at first glance that the inspector distinguished between pure pronunciation on the one hand and the German language on the other hand in his list of subjects, as this distinction indicates the great importance that was attached to the renunciation of Yiddish as a language of instruction in addition to the teaching of reading and writing skills. The attempt by the Austrian state to suppress the Yiddish language, which was deeply rooted in their tradition, with the help of the German school system, was met with rejection by most of the Jews of the Habsburg Empire. Thus, in 1801, the Nikolsburg Jewish chronicler Abraham Trebitsch lamented the Gzerot, that means the calamities from which the Jews had suffered in the preceding decades, including the abolition of rabbinical jurisdiction and compulsory military service, as well as the introduction of the standard school system. For the year 5548, that means 1787-88, he cynically noted that the authorities had ordered, I quote, the sons of Judah to be embraced with the embrace of writing, restrained by the bridle of speech and the sweetness of language. They shall no more shamefully speak the language of the stammers, meaning Yiddish, anymore. However, there were also voices among the traditional elite that welcomed the introduction of normal schooling and found something positive in the orientation of German instruction towards the suppression of the Yiddish language. When the Jewish German school in Brody was opened in 1784, the community leader Yakov Gelandau delivered a speech of encouragement for Jewish youth, as he called it, which was written in German and Hebrew, in which he praised the benefits of Joseph II's policy towards the Jews, including above all the introduction of German instruction. Quoting from the book of Job, he elusively listed stammering, that means the Yiddish language, as one of the evils from which the Jews had suffered since their dispersion. And along with their eloquence, they had also lost worldly wisdom, as he called it. Landau called on the children to seize the opportunity and perfect their language and customs in the German schools. While the German schools for Jewish children in Bohemia and Moravia continued to exist for a long time, the German Jewish school in Prague, for example, was only transformed into a general city school in 1850, where Jewish religious instruction was given. In Galicia, the entire normal school system for Jewish children was dissolved as early as 1806. In the shadow of the general Jacobin fear, the schools still established in the Josephinian spirit with their Jewish teachers, who were believed to be inclined towards the Enlightenment and secularism, paradoxically appeared to be too great a danger to the stability of the country. In addition, there was the unrelenting opposition of the traditional Jewish elites to the institution of schools against the background of Herz-Homberg's attempt at reform, which were perceived as encroaching, but there was also the resistance of the Jewish population to compulsory school attendance in their everyday lives. The Austrian state had repressively intervened in the structures of traditional Jewish life with a regulation of May 1785, which made attendance at advanced cheder classes dependent on the presentation of the of a certificate of attendance at German school. But above all, he had interfered in the Jewish life worlds, but above all, with the denial of official marriage permission to Jewish couples who could not present a normal school certificate at the district office, a decree which was introduced in 1786. The state had not achieved higher school attendance as a result. On the contrary, the Jewish population's ways and means of resisting compulsory schooling became increasingly diverse and inventive. If one considers the introduction and implementation of compulsory schooling for Jewish children in the Habsburg Empire in the context of the general educational reforms initiated under Maria Theresia and continued under Joseph II, and from the point of view of regulating life world contexts, one can certainly discern similarities in the intentions pursued towards Jews and non-Jews alike. First of all, it was a matter of standardizing, bureaucratizing, and hierarchizing the school system, the focus of which was to be the education of children to become useful subjects. To this end, the aim was to remove exclusive educational authority from the hands of the church or from autonomous community contexts, and to transfer it to the state. This could not take place without interventions in the respective life worlds. The extent of these interventions depended on various factors, such as the resistance to be expected from the corporate world and the state's willingness to compromise in the concrete design of the educational system. The compromise that the Austrian state made towards the Jews in the name of tolerance and religious freedom was that religious or Hebrew instruction, as traditional Jewish education was called by the authorities, remained under the exclusive supervision of the community elites. The structure and content of the Cheder lessons ultimately remained untouched. Even after the introduction of compulsory schooling, Jewish boys spent a large part of the day in traditional classrooms. Many stayed out of state school altogether. This created a duality of educational systems and even more, a dichotomy of life worlds, as Louise Hecht aptly noted. This duality also extended to the field of language. Here, Yiddish, spoken in the Cheder and deeply rooted in everyday life, competed as a traditional language of education and everyday life with a German language which was taught in the normal schools, imposed by the state and loaded with expectations of usefulness. The result of this competition, namely that Yiddish held the upper hand over German and that knowledge of the latter amongst the Jews of Galicia may have been very modest in the end, was anecdotally reflected in a satirical text by the maskil Joseph Perl, Megalé Tmirin. His protagonist only succeeds with difficulty in recognizing the language of a mysterious book as German on the basis of the letters, while he is unable to read and understand it, despite having attended German schools for many years in the past. In Galicia, therefore, the schools probably did not contribute much to establishing German as a Jewish language, and in the eyes of most Galician Jews around 1800, it was probably considered the non-Jewish language par excellence. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Well, as far as I understand, the author is not connected to us. Therefore, well, unless there are some other opinions, I don't think it's sensible to have a discussion over the text now that we can send emails to author asking him, because he cannot answer our questions unless there are some comments which, well, I don't want to.
It's unfortunate we can't communicate directly with this the author of this excellent presentation, but I'm assuming from what he said, and I would have followed it up just a little bit, he's touched on this in various ways, and that is that Yiddish was not anything special. What do I mean by that? It seems to me that if Germanists decide that Yiddish is a corrupted form of German, then it's not anything special. Because what would be interesting, and I thought he commented on this just a little bit, of how what education policy was on the part of the empire and its carriers, their teachers, toward other German dialects. I'm assuming that the same principles would be applied to schools, speakers of Tyrolean German, Steiermark German, Siebenbürgische Deutsch, and all the others. So it's in this sense that this was just a policy. Yiddish was nothing special. The only thing that perhaps was different is that Yiddish speakers were more stubborn than the other Germanic speakers, but because of their own cultural experience and their own modus operandi in life. But maybe that's also not true, because we do know that Tyrolean dialects in Steiermark, Siebenbürgische Deutsch is a little bit more difficult, still exist today. And you have effectively a bilingual situation. That is the local spoken language, local spoken variant of German, whatever it be, which would include Yiddish, and then Standard German. And to the degree to which these two could coexist, it depends on the attitudes of the speakers or the learners and the communities, and particularly the degree to which the state imposes its linguistic will. I guess all in all, what we're seeing here is nothing special on the part of Yiddish. It's just being treated like any other Germanic dialect on the part of the Austrian-Hungarian authorities, who are in turn not acting any differently from Britain or France toward the non-standard forms of whether it's English or French. And too bad we can't have a discussion about this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes?
Just a comment. Yeah, I found several notes, one of them also for Judah Leib Mises, for those who are familiar with the Jewish Enlightener. There was also an option of getting lessons privately from a tutor. You had to submit a note to the whatever the school authorities were, and then you didn't have to actually attend the school. You can take them at home with a tutor. So that was an option. Just
Thank you very much.
May I just follow through? First of all, Susan Gall did in the 1980s, did work on Hungarian Schwabs. And you can see from her, she has transcriptions of Schwab German, local Schwab German speakers and how it sounds, but they also knew, of course, German as well, Standard German as well, so that happens too. But I wanted to just get back to the pronunciation business. I thought there would be a little bit more than that. This was a problem in general, and it wasn't only in Galicia that you had this problem. Anyone who knows the work of Anton Reh, the Sprachverhaltenis der Juden in Deutschland, which he wrote in 1844, it's all about accents and the difficulty in getting German accents for the students in Hamburg. He's, by the way, the ancestor of David Cameron, the prime minister, the former prime minister. But you have that in Prague, for instance. The big problem was the pronunciation of the U, because they would pronounce it as U instead of U, and in Galicia it was apparently I instead of U. So U was one of the things that they did it. Then you also had the pronunciation of the R, where there was something that was called Lorchen. I don't know if you know the way aristocrats spoke, but they wrote this way, they talked this way with a little way of talking with the R in their things. And this was called Lorchen, and this was also something from Eastern. Now, one of the questions is the pronunciation in Eastern Yiddish, in German, different from the pronunciation in Western Yiddish in German. I mean, that's one of the ways that you can actually look at the history of Yiddish.